Hello, Team 5. I just posted your grade for your half draft of your team's project report. I want to explain a few things and then also go over some aspects of your half draft. First of all, the way I grade these half drafts is by making an assumption. First of all, I have to make the assumption that most of your effort will be on the beginning of each section. So because of the different ways teams approach the half drafts, some of course focus on providing lots of content. They write on all the sections, and then others put most of their effort on quality writing at the beginning. So I make the assumption basically that the groups divide the work amongst the various sections, and that in terms of like writing and editing, that their best writing will be at the beginning pages. So basically I grade these relative to the progress of the other teams in terms of three criteria. And the three criteria are overall content. How far along are you in developing your report in comparison to the other teams? Then the writing expectations that I provide. And again, I evaluate those writing expectations only in terms of the first page of each section, because it would be entirely unfair if I used more, because I realize if you've basically essentially got your paper done in first draft, it hasn't been edited very finely. So I respect that, and you would do very good in content, but maybe less well in terms of the writing quality, particularly on pages after the first page of each section. And then the third criteria that I evaluate these half drafts on are the quality of the references. So basically your background research. So I'm happy to say that I'm quite pleased with the performance of all four teams. And basically I ended up giving 3 A minuses and 1 A on this half draft. And so now I'm going to talk about your particular paper. I'm happy to say that you did very well on content, and you also did very well on writing expectations. Another team did better in terms of references, but you guys did very well in terms of meeting writing expectations, and very well in terms of content. Now I'm showing you here just those pages that I commented on, which again I commented on the first page of each section because I'm commenting on the writing expectations. Again, why didn't I mark up your whole paper? Because I realize it's a first draft and I don't want to rewrite your paper for you. I want to give you some advice again on how to meet my writing expectations, and hopefully you will see that these writing expectations ensure the content of your paper. So again, if you're writing in active voice, you're having to investigate the features to fill in those sentences. You'll have to know who the actor is and what behavior is occurring. So right here, let's take a look at the first page. And my first comment really here is about your thesis statement. You've got a thesis statement here, it appears, for the history section, but you don't have one yet for your overall paper. And again, I realize that this paper is a draft. So you will want, I have a comment here down at the bottom that you will want a thesis statement for the entire report to come before the background and scope. And it looks like the second part of your first sentence may actually be that thesis statement. Maybe as simple as saying the climate change presents Miami-Dade County environmental challenges to adapt. So again, there's some signs of a thesis for the overall paper in that second statement. second part of that first sentence. The first part of the first sentence does appear to be the thesis, though, for the history section. However, down here on the side, if you take a look, I've kind of reworded things again to kind of meet some grammar qualities. You'll notice right away in this first phrase, prepositional phrase, it's actually grammatically incorrect because using the word it's, the pronoun, would refer to the first noun or the subject of the sentence. And we could see that the subject of the sentence is actually residents. And so residents being plural and it's being singular, you have what's known as a subject pronoun mismatch. So I'm assuming here that you're actually talking about the history of the environment in Miami-Dade County, or maybe you're talking about the history of the residents, which actually does make sense. But then in that case, it would be their history rather than its history, because of course residents is plural. So down here on the side, I'm assuming that to correct this sentence to be grammatically correct, it would be something to the extent Miami-Dade County residents manipulated the environment throughout their history to suit their needs. And that's a nice, pithy, active voice thesis statement. Again, that reads, Miami-Dade County residents manipulated the environment throughout their history to suit their needs. And that follows well. And it also corrects the problems that I note. Within a single sentence, you should maintain the tense. You shouldn't have multiple tenses within the same sentence. And here you've got presents as a verb, which is a present tense verb. You have manipulated, which is a past tense verb, and will require, which is a future tense verb. So you have all the tenses represented. If you have more than one tense in a sentence, that's often an indication that the compound or complex sentence needs to be broken into two or more sentences. And so here I am breaking that up and as so forth. You could see here that just putting things again in active voice, I have this sentence, archaeological evidence suggests the Tequesta tribe inhabited the area as far back as 10,000 years. And again, that's just a simpler way. The reader will understand that better than to say that it was inhabited by some unknown group, right? So basically, we're just pulling up this Tequesta tribe, giving it to the reader earlier so they know that the archaeological evidence suggests that the Tequesta tribe inhabited the area as far back as 10,000 years. And then we could, of course, eliminate Tequesta in these following sentences. And usually that's a good approach, to be very detailed up front and then assume that the reader understands the subject well enough that you can kind of gradually reduce the amount of detail and eventually go with a pronoun. So if you notice here, I dropped the Tequesta in the next sentence and just said the tribe occupied the area during the time Europeans discovered the land in 1513. And then I go with the pronoun it. And of course, it's very clear that it as the subject refers to the subject of the previous sentence, which is the tribe. It fished, hunted, and gathered the fruit. Then I kind of did some work again, putting the prepositional phrases a little later in the sentence. Getting to that strong active verb quickly will help the reader understand what you're meaning a little earlier. So Spain controlled Florida. Spain controlled Florida from 1567 to 1821 until it sold the land to the United States for $5 million. Nice, pithy, straightforward, simple sentences. The major industry at that time, I actually took some liberty with this sentence. And flip things around again, just to make them more clear. Who's the subject? Floridians, right? The people who live in Florida, we call them Floridians. Floridians subsisted on resources from sunken ships that sailed too close to the coral reefs at that time in a practice of wrecking. This is an instance where you might even make this two sentences, and rather than say in a practice of wrecking, we could just say Floridians subsisted on resources from sunken ships that sailed too close to the coral reefs at that time. And then say this practice of wrecking employed most Floridians. So again, just kind of being real clear, breaking things up into multiple sentences where they're kind of vague. And that again will help make the topic sentence very clear if it's in active voice. Fewer than 1,000 people resided in the county in the late 1890s. Here you had some years that were out of order. Almost everything in this paragraph was chronological except for the late 1890s. So I suggested moving that sentence into a chronological order. So it's where the reader would expect to find it. And there you have. Here I had a question. It actually, but it actually turned out, and I said, oh, this is okay, because I did understand that you are saying that the railroad began a period of rapid development in 1896. So that's good. Here's the next section. I liked the active style. Great first sentence. Whoever wrote this, pay close attention. This is a person that's developing the style. Climate change impacts residents. Boy, right there. 4 words, and the reader has a good idea where you're going with this section. Climate change impacts residents. Do you see the noun, verb, object just right there up front? And then I suggest getting rid of this unnecessary word, living, residents living. Well, we know residents live, so we could just say climate change impacts residents throughout Miami-Dade County. So disaster preparation and mitigation greatly benefits everyone. Okay, we know we're talking now about Miami-Dade County residents, so it's just saying it benefits everyone rather than county residents is kind of nice. It's clear what we mean. The region confronts risk of hurricanes, flooding, and damage from other climate-related events. So in this case, I do have a question about, is there one negative impact of climate change, or are there impacts of climate change? That's a technical question that you'll want to address. Here's some, just getting rid of, oftentimes your really powerful verb gets kind of weakened with a bunch of extra words. You have this climate change action plan sets the course for combating. Combat is actually a very powerful verb. So if you just drop the sets the course for and instead goes with Miami-Dade County's climate change action plan combats the negative impacts of climate change. Very powerful. That's going to have a lot of effect on readers. Planning involves matters in which people have large emotional stakes, including the residents of Miami-Dade County. They want their government to represent the public interest. Period. That's solid. Very clear. Stop it. So again, shorter sentences. Readers will follow it. They'll grasp it. They'll understand it. You'll have much greater impact. Residents demand accountability. There's your subject noun, residents, followed quickly by that strong active verb, demand, and accountability is the object. 3 words, subject, verb, object, for the outcome of the action plan from agencies and officials of the county, etc., etc., etc. This next sentence has good sentence construction, and I just suggest, rather than say as well as, just go with and. And is simpler, but it's actually more accurate in this sense too, because you're saying that it describes the impact of climate change on Miami-Dade residents, as well as, so as well as means as good as or so forth, but you really mean and. It also describes the role, so you just mean and the responsibilities of each government. Again, nice. This person has a sense already of the active voice. Miami-Dade County residents experience the impact of climate change in a variety of ways. That's a nice start to a sentence. Loss of life. Okay, we hear that. That's a cliche. It's a better word is death, right? It can cause death. Or if you want to emphasize in this the loss, rather than, if you want to emphasize loss, you could say loss of life and property, losing the property, and use loss to play on both of those nouns. That would certainly make sense. So I'd say here, either go with death and property damage, or alternatively, loss of life and property, depending on what you want to emphasize. But loss of life and property damage, it could be improved. And then you said storms and flooding. Again, flooding's not really needed here. It doesn't really add anything because presumably the flooding comes from the storms that damaged the infrastructure. Here I made a mistake. At first, you see my comment about semicolons separating independent clauses. That's true. Then I realized that damage is the verb of that second part of the complex sentence, the second part of that independent clause. So that is actually fine. But I suggest that you go with storms damage infrastructure essential to residents. Again, eliminating unnecessary words will increase the impact of what you're trying to say. Moving this to the end, I also like to see that you use the serial comma, sometimes referred to as the Oxford comma. It's almost always better, and you'll eliminate confusion in certain circumstances. Climate change threatens the life. Here I had a question. I assume you mean here, it wasn't really clear to me with this serial comma though. And here I'm saying that I'm assuming that you're trying to say more than 2.6 million Miami-Dade residents face increases in infectious disease, high unemployment, and drinking water contamination due to flooding. So all of those things are due to flooding, not just the drinking water contamination. The way you have it currently worded is only the drinking water contamination is due to flooding, but I'm assuming you're talking about high unemployment that's due to flooding, infectious disease that's due to flooding, and drinking water contamination that's due to flooding. So you want the due to flooding to come at the end of the sentence. Here's some kind of minor, add an A. Rather than saying it creates the onerous task, it'd be stronger to say it imposes the onerous task for disclosure of privileged confidential data. The Trump administration plans to change environmental policies it deems harmful and unnecessary. Here, if you just leave the quotes, it sounds like you as a team are agreeing with the Trump administration, though I suspect you're not agreeing just after reading through your paper. I'm assuming that you're kind of neutral, either neutral or you disagree that these environmental policies are harmful and unnecessary. So just by adding it deems harmful and unnecessary, you are presenting the information in a neutral fashion. Planning tools and techniques. Here, again, changing as well as with one word. Again, if you could reduce the number of words, it's always better and clearer. And here you could see of doing as nice a job as as well as does. So you have the Miami-Dade County Climate Action Plan incorporates master planning of transportation, land use, and economic. I changed planning to elements. And then you could come right back and say, this is comprehensive planning. So you want to say, comprehensive planning aims to reduce carbon dioxide emissions and capture carbon dioxide pollution with increased green space to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change. Here's another instance where I recommend using the serial comma. And then here you could say counties of southwestern Florida created a climate change compact to foster collaboration. So rather than create organization and collaboration, just foster collaboration among county governments. The southeastern Florida Climate Change Compact emphasizes transportation and infrastructure planning tools to affect climate change. Miami-Dade Climate Change, the Miami-Dade Climate Change Action Plan reflects these regional priorities. Again, writing it in active voice, it's clearer. It's clear, shorter. The reader will understand you better. Here, though, here's a good section. Again, somebody's writing well in your group, and you guys were handsomely rewarded. Keep up the good work. Here's a paragraph I liked, I didn't touch. Here's a comment that I have on the content, though. I see lots of mitigation planning, and I asked, how about adaptation planning? Have you considered that? Are they retrofitting areas for the inevitable as well, the inevitable flooding? Later in your paper, this turned out to be an issue of organization, because later on in the paper, I find out that you do have elements of adaptation planning, but you talk about them much later, and I think they need to be included in the planning tools and techniques. So you talk about pumps and raising the roadway. Those are adaptive measures as that in addition to these mitigation measures. So they're planning tools. Outcomes. Miami-Dade County's action will protect which cities? You had these cities, but you never mentioned any cities. So I'm assuming you mean the cities within the county, but I just changed it since I didn't know. Miami-Dade County's action will protect local resources and infrastructure. So again, here are the adaptation measures that I mentioned earlier, and these contrast with mitigation measures. So if you look at the two elements for planning for climate change, there's the mitigation aspects, right? To reduce carbon emissions and to capture or to sequester carbon using green space and trees and so forth. Those issues are mitigating the effects or lessening the harmful effects, but then also there are efforts to change our infrastructure, to raise roads, to increase pumping and so forth in measures to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And here you're talking about adaptation. The costly investment will help the region adapt to rising tides for many decades. Let's see what we have here. So again, I have this comment about unclear, but I just read you a sentence that clears all of that up. Miami will have more time to plan, prepare, and implement continued resolutions. Miami joins cities throughout the world, active voice. Miami joins cities throughout the world in a battle against eroding soil, high tides, and frequent flooding. Several countries face many of the same issues. Period. Just short, nice, pithy. Miami should examine planning efforts in the Netherlands, Venice, and New Orleans for insight on drainage modifications to mitigate flooding. Nice, straight, simple, to the point sentences. Miami can position itself to be a global leader in environmental planning by researching the successes and missteps of other governments facing the same problems. Here's another question. Here's an instance where you have a very long quote. When you have a very long quote, you want to single space it, indent on both sides, and then you don't have any quotation marks. Standard formatting for long quotes. Single spaced, indented on both sides, and without quotation marks. Here is something I was unclear about what you meant. Taking a stab at some of this, I have state and federal involvement depends on continued research and documentation. Effective mitigation planning requires ongoing education and interdepartmental collaboration. Here, again, whenever you can find that strong active verb that will substitute for a verb preposition combination like bring together, unite, much better. The meetings inform participants about the effects of rising sea levels on the county and generate ideas that will help the southern region of Florida adapt to environmental changes. For example, a partnership of the Miami-Dade Office of Sustainability and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's Office of Coastal Management meets with representatives of multiple municipal departments. And this is actually the sentence that began on the previous page and ended on the top of this page. Again, here you've got some adaptation tools that probably belong in the tools section. So that said, I want to congratulate you on getting the half draft. Keep going, team. You're doing great. Again, you were the best on content, and you were the best on meeting my writing expectations. So good job. Let me know if you have any questions.